Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the special meeting of the Salisbury City Council on August 17th, 2020. I'd like to call the special meeting to order. I'd like to welcome everybody that's on this, participating in this Zoom meeting, and also announce that at the end of the special meeting, after we adjourn, we will return to our normal work session. At this time, please join me in a moment of silent prayer and meditation.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll call for a motion and a second to adopt the legislative agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Boda made the motion. Ms. Blake, second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Mr. Boda?
Aye.
Ms. Jackson?
Aye.
Ms. Blake?
Aye.
Mrs. Gregory?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Vote is 5-0. I'll entertain a motion to approve resolution number 3057.
So move.
Mr. President, if I could just interrupt, Keith is having trouble getting on. Any chance we could go to the second one and come back?
Sure.
Thank you.
Since we have a motion on the floor, can you withdraw your motion, Ms.
I
Jackson?
withdraw my motion.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to approve ordinance number 2613 for the first reading.
So
moved.
moved. Second.
Well, we'll give it to Ms. Jackson. That's the first name I heard. And we'll give it to Ms. Blake, which is the second name I heard. So all those in favor? No, I'm sorry, we gotta have the reading first. Colonel Menshine, are you going to do the presentation?
I can, sir.
Can I make a request? Is there any way he can give the presentation with a picture? Just so we could put a face to the person giving the presentation, if possible.
I think the colonel is going to handle the questions. That's all I was pointing out. Mr. Tillman will read the ordinance. Mr. Tillman?
Thank you. This is an ordinance of the City of Salisbury, Maryland, authorizing the FY 2021 general fund budget, revising positions and authorizing the restructure of the Salisbury Police Department command, supervisory, and officer position allocation. Whereas the Police Department is undertaking a restructure of command and supervisory positions, and whereas the restructure is necessary to redistribute the workload and enhance the efficiency and quality of public services, and whereas the restructuring will decrease the authorized position count from 1 police major position to 0 police major positions, and whereas the restructuring will decrease authorized position count from 78 police officer positions to 76 police officer positions, and whereas the restructure will increase the authorized position count from 7 police sergeant positions to 8 police sergeant positions, and whereas the Salisbury Police Department will increase the authorized position count from 7 police corporal positions to 9 police corporal positions, and whereas the salary savings realized as a result of the aforementioned changes to the position count authorizations will be utilized to fund police officer positions below the rank of corporal, and whereas this change will result in salary savings while not increasing total authorized strength of 103 police officer positions, and whereas 7 of the 76 police officer positions will remain frozen, and whereas the restructure of the department will result in the following positions. It will result in chief of police, 1 currently, 1 new, assistant chief, 1 current, 1 new, major, 1 current, 0 new, captains, 2 and 2, lieutenants, 6 and 6, remaining the same. Sergeants will go from 7 to 8. Corporals will go from 7 to 9, and police officers will go from 78 to 76. And whereas the Salisbury Police Department will remain in this new structure for the test period no less than 1 year in order to realize any further adjustments needed to be made for the improvement. And whereas SC 17-3 states that the council shall set the number of police officers to be employed by the city. And whereas the Department of Finance, in connection with the current approved city budget, requires the amended restructuring information in order to tie the newly restructured positions to the current budget, which budget set limits based on the current position allotment within the City of Salisbury Police Department. Now therefore be it ordained that the City Council of the City of Salisbury hereby authorizes this restructure of the Salisbury Police Department and amends the FY 2021 budget as outlined above. This ordinance was duly passed at a meeting of the Council of the City of Salisbury, etc.
Thank you, Mr. Tillman. Questions or comments beyond the ones that were asked at the work session? Mr. Boda?
No questions or comments.
Thank you. Ms. Jackson?
No questions or comments.
Blake?
None.
Thank you. Mrs. Gregory?
None.
Just one comment and one question for me, which I didn't ask. I forgot to ask at the original meeting. It says for a trial period of 1 year. At the end of that, Mr. Tillman, do we have to vote on it again, or will that structure just carry through?
I think unless changed, it doesn't state that it's a temporary change. It just says that they're going to try it for 1 year. But
Okay.
I don't think the language of the statute limits it just to 1 year.
Okay. And I'd like to also announce that during that meeting, there was a common thread that all of the council people, if I may speak for them, if I speak out of turn, please just let me know. But we were very encouraged to the fact that there are going to be more people on the street. And I think the community policing that was begun is going to be enhanced during this period of time. And we all agreed that this was a positive move. Is there anybody that, am I exaggerating the response, or I'm getting good looks, so we'll be all right.
I'll agree.
All right, thank you. We'll now vote on the motion. All those in favor of ordinance number 2613 for the first reading, please signify by saying aye. Mr. Boda?
Aye.
Ms. Jackson?
Aye.
Ms. Blake?
Aye.
Mrs. Gregory?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. The vote is 5-0. I see Mr. Cordray is on the phone now, so I'll entertain a motion to approve resolution number 3057.
So move.
Second.
Jackson and Mr. Boda. Who's going to, Jill, you're going to do the
I'm going to
resolution?
pass this off to Mr. Cordray, our experts on bonds.
All right, if you could read the resolution, that'd be fine. Thank you.
So my plan was to summarize the resolution per the cover letter points. Is that appropriate, Mark?
I think as long as, not that anybody wants to do it, but if you want me to, I'll read the introductory paragraph, which summarizes everything. Would you
Yeah,
like?
why don't you do that,
All
Mr.
right.
Tillman, and then we'll give Keith the floor.
Get a little sip of water there before I get started. This is a resolution of the council of the city of Salisbury, adopted pursuant to the authority of sections 19-301 and 19-309 inclusive of the local government article of the annotated code of Maryland, sections 9-1601 to 9-1622 inclusive of the environment article of the annotated code of Maryland, sections SC 7-45 and SC 7-46 of the charter of the city of Salisbury, and ordinance 2497 passed by the council on August 13th, 2018, approved by the mayor of the city on August 16th, 2018, and effective on August 16th, 2018, authorizing and empowering the city of Salisbury to issue and sell upon its full faith and credit 2 separate series of general obligation bonds. One to be issued in the original principal amount not to exceed $90,000 and to be designated as the City of Salisbury Water Quality Bond Series 2020A. and the other to be issued in the original principal amount of $30,000 and to be designated as City of Salisbury Water Quality Bond Series 2020B, or as otherwise required as provided herein. The bonds to be issued and sold and the proceeds thereof to be used for and applied for the public purpose of the financing or reimbursing costs of the project generally referred to by the city as the Mount Herman Road Sewer Extension, as provided herein. Prescribing, approving, and adopting the forms and tenor of the bonds, the terms and conditions for the issuance and sale of the bonds by private sale without public bidding to the Maryland Water Quality Financing Administration, known as the Administration, and other details, incident thereto, and authorizing the mayor on behalf of the city to adjust and to fix certain details of the bonds, providing for the potential forgiveness of one of the bonds, approving and authorizing and redirecting the execution and delivery of 2 loan agreements with the administration pursuant to which the advances will be made under the bonds, authorizing certain officials to take certain actions with respect to the loan agreements, and designating certain officials as authorized officers for the purpose of the loan agreements, providing for the disbursement of advances of the bonds, providing for the imposition and collection of ad valorem taxes sufficient for the prompt payment of the principal of and interest on the bonds, pledging the full faith and credit and unlimited taxing power of the city to the prompt payment of the principal of and interest on the bonds, providing that the principal of and interest on the bonds will be payable in the first instance from the revenues received by the city in connection with the operation of the wastewater system serving the city, and to the extent necessary from the water quality system serving the city, all to the extent available therefore, providing that the principal and interest on the bonds also may be paid from any other sources of revenue lawfully available to the city for such purpose, authorizing and directing officials and employees of the city to take any and all action necessary to complete and close the sale and delivery of the bonds, providing that notwithstanding anything to the contrary contained in the ordinance or this resolution, the city shall use and apply proceeds of the bonds only as permitted by the loan agreements, the Clean Water Act as defined by the loan agreements, and the Maryland Water Quality Financing Administration Act as defined by this resolution, providing that the provisions of this resolution shall be liberally construed and otherwise generally relating to the issuance, sale, delivery, and payment of and for the bonds. That's it.
You're muted, Jack.
I apologize. I think now we need a summary. Mr. Cordry, could you just give us a brief summary of exactly what was said, because the legalese is hard for me to understand.
Gotcha. So what we have are 2 separate series of general obligation bonds. The 2020A series is a $90,000 bond, and then the 2020B is a $30,000 bond. So we've got $120,000 of proceeds that are going to be used to fund the Mount Herman Road Sewer Extension Project. Just going through some of the highlights of the cover memo, we had a summary of some of the provisions of the resolution. The interest on both bonds will be taxable, but the rate will be similar to if the bonds were tax exempt. So the 2020B bond will not have a scheduled amortization unless the payment is demanded by the Maryland Water Quality Fund. So in other words, it's a forgiveness loan. So long as the city complies with the agreement, we will not have to pay that bond back. The interest rate is established by a formula provided in the resolution. So assuming closing occurs in August of 2020, the rate will be 0.4%. So it's a great rate. So again, on the B loan, the city won't be required to pay debt service on the loan unless the city defaults under the corresponding loan agreement. If the city does not default, then such bond will be deemed forgiven and terminated on the 10-year anniversary date.
Good. That's a good summation. Thank you, Mr. Audrey,
you
it
got
really
it.
makes a big difference. Any questions or comments from council members? Mr. Boda,
No questions or comments.
Ms. Jackson,
No questions, no comments.
Ms. Blake?
None at this time.
Thank you. Mrs. Gregory?
No questions.
All right, hearing none, I'll call the motion. All those in favor of resolution number 3057, please signify by saying aye. Mr. Boda,
Aye.
Ms. Jackson,
Aye.
Ms. Blake,
Aye.
Mrs. Gregory.
Aye.
The chair votes aye. The vote is 5-0. Thank you. Do we have any requests for comments? Ms. Glanz?
We do not.
Okay. Since we don't have any then, I will adjourn this meeting and we will go right into our work session. So this meeting, a special meeting of the Salisbury City Council of August 17th is hereby adjourned. Continuing now with the work session portion. First up, we have a donation of residential property located at 300 Delaware Avenue. And we'd like to welcome, is he here? Is Ron here?
Yes.
I am.
Okay, I'd like to welcome Community Development Director, Ron Strickler. Ron, it's good to have you. Welcome aboard and be prepared to work.
I stepped in. I'm ready.
Go ahead.
All right. So we were approached by GNI Properties. I would say probably sometime in the fall about the donation of 300 Delaware Ave. A lot of information was passed back and forth throughout city administrators, the mayor, and it's something that I want to move forward with. Originally, the project required the city to cover an appraisal and closing costs for the property. I countered with we're not benefiting from an appraisal, so GNI had the appraisal done on their own. We would just simply have to cover the closing costs. Initially, when the project was first started, it looked as though we were going to move forward with the demolition of the site. I'm going to share my screen just so that you're able to view the property. Let me know if you are able to see it.
Yes, we have it.
Okay. So you can see in this first picture here, these windows are boarded up. That is no longer, they're no longer boarded up. There's actually new windows that were placed in both of those locations. It appears as though they started redoing some of the structure. And I'm just going to show you some more. This is directly catty corner from the police station. And there's actually two existing structures. You can see the garage here. The garage is in good shape. You know, I guess essentially what they plan on doing was tearing the property down. But I think that we have an opportunity here to possibly take the donation of the existing structures and sell to an interested party contingent upon rehabilitation plan and a deadline in which that rehabilitation plan would be set. So what that does for the Housing and Community Development Department is we can start raising funds to continue to do projects like this in the community that we might not further have. So I know the ordinance, the resolution, the way it's written right now states that we would move to demolition. But late last week we met with Chad, our building inspector, and Chad said the building it doesn't need to be rebuilt. It can be fixed. If we tear it down, it doesn't meet the current code of 8,000 square feet. So we would have to sell it as is. But even if it's $10,000, it's $10,000 we didn't have minus our closing costs. But the closing costs would be covered by our grant, Maryland Historic Trust grant that we have for acquisition of properties, rehabilitation, and or demolition. We'd have to seek approval for that, which shouldn't be a problem. But I think it's an opportunity, you know, for us to keep, rather than tear it down and have an empty lot that we're going to have to worry about maintaining. We could sell it as is and possibly generate some revenue to continue to do projects like this moving forward.
Interesting concept. Questions from the council people? Mr. Boda?
Why was GNI trying to get rid of the property?
That I don't know originally. I mean, I'm assuming that they didn't want to put the time and effort into fixing it. This is similar to, I think, 4 years ago in my research, they donated another property, 137 Delaware Ave. And that property was contingent. The donation was contingent upon us having basically another single family home on it. That lot still sits vacant. G&I bought a block of houses over on Delaware Ave when they purchased this. It was a large group because it has the exact same number and folio number as the property at 137. So they didn't say, they weren't concerned about like fixing it. I don't think they want to put the time into it. And we even talked to them about us, possibly selling it. And they're like, yeah, we just don't have the time or money to put into it right now, is what they told us.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else, Mr. Bowden?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Ms. Jackson?
Ron,
Yes.
thank you so much, because I was really kind of, from reading the agenda for today, I was kind of upset because I was looking at it as if we're tearing down houses instead of rehabilitating houses for people to live in. And then I saw where it was a parking lot. You were suggesting to make a parking lot for the police department. And I'm like, okay, police parking spaces versus housing for people. I thank you so much. And I thank the group of you who decided to make this happen. I really appreciate that, because we need more housing. Thank you.
Thank you, April. Ms. Blake?
Two things. One, contingent of a sale of the property. I think you mentioned there would have to be a rehab plan and a timeline. If that wasn't met, would there be a consequence to that?
I think ultimately depending on how we wrote up, and Mark would probably have to speak a little bit more to that, but I would assume that if we said 12 months, we would have to approve the rehabilitation plan prior to sale. And I don't know if it's been done before, but if within those 12 months, it would revert back to ownership of the city, if we wrote it that way. And then we could, I don't know if the funds would need to be returned, but I would assume not. I'd have to
I would just hate to have it sold and then it sit there anyway. And the other thing is, I just want to make sure we put this out there and it's clear. It's a G&I property.
It is a G&I property.
Okay.
Currently.
Okay. Just asking because I'm just a clinical social worker. I have nothing to do with legality, so I'll yield to Mark. They are involved in the current suit against the city, so they're one of the leading people. Does that make a conflict of interest for this property at all?
Question for me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, I don't think so.
Okay.
They're just challenging an ordinance that was passed by the
Right.
city along with a number of other landlords, and there's been no discussion of that. This isn't tied to that in any way. And clearly we can do a land disposition agreement just like we normally do with any buyer to put the restrictions on it that Mr. Strickler was referring to. So in other words, if the city's going to sell it to somebody, the city should get what they want out of it. And the way to do that is put it in the agreement.
Perfect.
We would definitely shoot
this
for
idea.
We would definitely shoot for a single family home, I think, in this instance.
Thank you. Mrs. Gregory?
Well, my question's already asked by April, so, yeah, I'm good with this. I like it.
I have a couple of questions, Ron. Have we talked to SNH or Habitat? Would they have an interest in doing that?
We have not spoke to them about this particular property. We do have some other properties in mind that we are getting ready to.
Everybody will pop up and it pops up through the Zoom app.
We do have some other properties that we're actually exploring that we'll be talking to them about, but we could include that in here as well.
Yeah, I would include it just for an informational purpose. It's a pretty smooth thing that if we can do it, but that's up to your recommendation. So Thank you very much. If there are no other further questions now, should we move this forward? Mr. Boda,
Yes.
Ms. Jackson,
Yes.
Ms. Blake,
Absolutely.
Mrs. Gregory,
Yes.
and I concur. So we have concurrence to move it to the next meeting.
And
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
And again, welcome
you
aboard.
can either do the gallery view like this, or if you want to do speaker view, if you click that,
We hear you. If you
it will
could.
be a big picture and everybody else will be.
Okay. Next up, we have Infrastructure Development Director Amanda Pollock to discuss a MOU with the Simba. Amanda,
Right,
good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. So this is a memorandum of understanding with ISIMBA, which is the Eastern Shore chapter of the International Mountain Biking Association. We've passed similar MOUs with ISIMBA before in the city park and at Naylor Mill. This is for additional mountain biking trails up at the Naylor Mill complex in and around the forest conservation easement. These trails will tie into the northernmost rail trail segment, which we're calling segment 7B because that was part of the rail trail master plan. That is the area that we had received grant funding from the state. The design's been complete and it's currently in the state's hands to review. And then once we get their approval, we'll be able to put that out for bid. So we're excited that there will be additional trails north of that termination of the rail trail in the Naylor Mill Forest area. So the MOU essentially defines the responsibilities of ISIMBA versus the city. And ISIMBA will design all the trails, obtain the permits, get any approvals for construction, supervise volunteers during construction, and they'll maintain the trails. The city will review the design, authorize them to put up signage and construct the trails. And ISIMBA works closely with the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. So they take these projects to BPAC, and actually the MOU was discussed at BPAC meetings. And in case there are any questions that I can't answer, we have Alex McRae from BPAC and ISIMBA on the Zoom today, as well as Will White, the city's transportation project specialist. So again, this is a very similar MOU to other ones that we have executed, but it allows them to continue to build more trails at Naylor Mill.
Thank you, Amanda. Alex, do you have anything to add before we ask questions? Alex, you have to unmute Alex.
Unmute myself.
There
Okay.
you go.
Yeah. It is a good opportunity for more to have more trails. We're not just focused on mountain biking. We're also work with closely with the running community, and we would like to encourage all trail users to be able to use these trails. So it's not just for mountain bikers alone, but we do have there is a pretty good crew of people out there that are experienced with trail building. Another person that's on this call is Mike Perry, who is the ESMBA, the trail chair for our organization. So he is also available to answer some questions if you have any for him.
Great, thank you, Alex. Any questions? And then if Mike, you can jump in if you'd like. Mr. Bode, any questions?
No, I think this is great, and it continues adding another element up there in that park, and it's a great resource for our citizens and for people coming to the area to exercise and enjoy the outdoors. A couple of times that I've been up there, it's a lot of times it's families up there together, and it's a great family activity. So I support this 100%.
Thank you, Mr. Bode. Ms. Jackson?
I support it, and I have no other questions.
Thank you, Ms. Blake.
So absolutely fabulous, 100% support.
Mrs. Gregory?
The only question I had was how accessible is this going to be? Is it going to be, it's going to be, it's not going to be paved or anything like that, is it?
These trails are not paved because they are a little bit more in the woods and have some
Right.
topo. Our rail trail is ADA accessible and will be paved, so that where it is state funded and it is also a hiker biker multimodal trail, it will be ADA accessible.
Okay, awesome. Great, thanks.
I just have a comment, not a question. We've had great success working with these groups before, and I don't see anything but positive coming out of this. So I want to thank Mike and Alex for your hard work as always, and we have consensus to move this forward. So it'll be on the next agenda for the regular meeting. So thank you guys, appreciate it very much. Amanda, you can get going on it, and we're all set.
Great.
Thank you. Next,
Thank
we
you
have
all.
no problem. Mike, you want to say something?
I don't really have anything to add. I think Alex has done the majority of the work on this. And I would like to add that I work with the City Parks and Rec Committee. I'm on that committee. I have been for a number of years. And I appreciate the opportunity to be able to bring more trails to the Salisbury area.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Amanda, we have another one in your area, the Comprehensive Connection Charge Code. Sounds like a very interesting topic.
It is. So this is a continuation of the last few work sessions. Now we're actually presenting the formal code changes that we've been talking about sort of in more vague terms for the comprehensive connection charges. So this is where we're looking to change the way we assess capacity fees and central system line fees and adopt the recommendations that were given to us from the 2018 water and sewer rate study to make it more of an equity-based connection fee. So there's nothing that's changed from the last time I presented it with how we're structuring the fees. However, we had not presented the full code. So what you have before you, and we look forward to hearing it read at legislative session, is the very long amount of code changes. You know, the phrasing of capacity fee has to be changed to connection fee throughout the code. And we've made the other adjustments to facility fees being renamed as infrastructure reimbursement fees, and really trying to make all the fee structure more clear in the code. Additionally, there were the incentive programs that we made some minor adjustments to. We've always had the affordable housing capacity fee waiver, so we've changed that to be a connection fee waiver. And we also wanted to add some parameters that some of our other incentive programs have had, such as that it's valid for 2 years, it could be renewable for 1-year terms after that, and that it's non-transferable. So I thought that was important because sometimes we've had a few of those projects that did not actually come to fruition, but the waivers are still kind of out there. Also, the development and redevelopment EDU waiver, we are not doing in this code because we've been handling that separately, as you know. That program for the downtown district is going on a separate track, but we already use the proper nomenclature of connection fees in that new code. And then finally, the single family permit fee waivers, that has just been an incentive program that was not in the code before. So we've added that to the code, but it only applies to single family lots platted as of the date of passing of the ordinance, so that it's truly for infill only, that this is not necessarily to incentivize single family, new construction, new subdivisions. That could be something you consider some other time, but that program was really to incentivize infill. So we wanted to make that clear in the code. So another thing that's new tonight, we had talked about if we switch to an equity-based fee, what that fee would be and how much higher it is than the current capacity fees. So I've given you a recommendation tonight and a separate ordinance to adopt a new fee structure. And so the current capacity fees are $3,533 per EDU, per equivalent dwelling unit. So that $3,500 has been in effect since, I believe, 2013. So it's been 7 or so years that we've had that capacity fee level. If we switch to the equity-based, the consultants had given us a recommendation based on the actual valuation of the water and the sewer system, and the equity-based fee would be $9,746 per EDU. So that is a considerable increase and not something that we feel that development could bear right now. So we looked at what type of fee, what level fee, and what kind of increase could we recommend at this time, understanding that the new connection fee rolls both the capacity fees and the central system line fee together. We have had that fee for 7 years, so I wanted to add a little bit for inflation. So what I recommended is about a 5% increase over the current capacity fee. So that would be a connection fee of $3,710 versus the $3,533. So that rate, I then compared that to what is that as a percentage of the full equity. It's a 38% buy-in of the full equity of the system. So ultimately, our goal would be to get that to 100%. But it's not realistic, I don't think, in my opinion, to do that in one fell swoop. It's not going to be realistic over 2 or 3 years. This is going to be something we need to build up to. We understand why we want to get there, but we also can't bring development to a grinding halt. So we need to do this in a realistic fashion. So working with the administration, we thought that a 5% increase be over capacity fees in that it is rolling up multiple fees could be a reasonable first step in this process. So that is a separate ordinance. So once we adopt the code changes, we would also look to adopt the fee structure as well so that we could implement it immediately.
I can remember back to when the consultants made their presentation. And I think that the initial reaction from the board, including myself, was my jaw hit the table. Mr. Cordy, feel free to jump in here. But I had a concern back then, and I still have a concern. 5%, while it doesn't sound like a lot, can be a lot for let's say a family that is going to buy a house like the one we're going to try to turn over. And that's a lot of money. Have we done an analysis, Mr. Cordry, of the total impact? Because if I remember correctly, and it was a while ago now, I forget when it was, but I was I think it was just on the council then. And it came back that what was the reason for that higher number? I remember the whole discussion, but I don't remember the reason for that specific significant increase.
It's really a complete relook at how we calculate those fees. And their recommendation was have people buy into your existing system at the current valuation of the system, where capacity fees were truly only looking at projects in our CIP that were capacity based and what percentage of those projects were capacity based. And we made the fee off of that. But the way the code was written, it was based off of a 10-year CIP, which has not been common practice to adopt. So we had struggled with even coming up with a realistic capacity fee. So part of why this was recommended is it's much easier to defend this. Coming up with the valuation of the system divided by the capacity of it, it's a much simpler calculation to get to and to defend to someone and say, this is why, this is how you're buying in at this level of equity. But, again, they were recommending you peel off the Band-Aid and this is it. This is the fee. That's the part that we're saying we just don't feel like we could do right now. But I don't think there's a problem with essentially the city saying we're willing to subsidize this until it can really get up and rolling to a full equity buy-in, which is fine. I mean, we can't put that much more burden. A $6,000 change in a fee per EDU would just bring things to a halt. So The increase is just under $200 per EDU. Again, we could look at keeping it almost essentially the same if you'd like, but do keep in mind it is more than just one fee being rolled in together. So I had looked at, not all projects have a central system line fee. It depends on where they tie in. So I try to kind of look at an average of projects and how many have that, how many don't. So, it was not an exact science to come up with 5%, but.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Boda, questions?
First, thank you, Amanda, for all the work on this and allowing for the input. And it's important to have that recognition that in any economy you can't just halt construction. I mean, it just is not. It's not by way of fee. I mean, that's not responsible. So I want to thank you for maintaining that perspective through this. And going through, and both of the ordinances are reflective of all the discussions that we've had over the past months about this issue. So I support this and think we should move forward with it. Jack, I think you were muted.
Jackson? April, you're muted too. There you go.
I have no questions, and I thank Amanda for all her hard work.
Thank you. Ms. Blake?
I mean, so say the fee, it's the way it's supposed to be was $7,000 something dollars.
They were recommending it was $9,700.
Oh, no, okay. So at a 5% increase, just how many years would it take to get up to that level?
That's a good question.
I'm thinking
20.
Yeah, probably at least. And I didn't calculate that. And I think some of that may have to be a judgment call on if we stick at a steady 5% increase. I think it sort of depends year by year how water and sewer rates are looking in the financial picture of the city and its citizens. So at this point, I was just recommending this first step. And I think each year at budget time, we'll have to look at this with everything else on how much we would want to consider raising it. But yeah, it could take 10 years plus, more than that, even realistically, honestly, to get up to the $9,000 some dollars.
Well, it's a very thought out project and idea, and I think we should move it forward.
Thank you, Ms. Blake. Mrs. Gregory?
I think we should move it forward.
Yep. One more question. Maybe, Keith, I remember you and I were sitting there when those numbers were given. I think you presented them, the $9,000. Am I right?
Yes, we were there when I think the consultant presented the
yeah. And it was more than 10 years, if my memory serves me, that it would take us to do it if we were approximately the same as where we are. I have two concerns, and one of them is I'm concerned about this year's budget and the kind of impact. We don't know what's going to happen. What's the parking loss so far? It was a big number. Does anybody remember what that number was? Julia?
Keith.
Keith, do you remember?
It's the numbers can move while we make adjustments here at the end of the year, but it was over $50,000, and that we lost last year, and this year with the revenues that were short, it'll be more than that. It'll be more than 50. But the parking fund, for whatever it's worth, does make a contribution of $100,000 to the general fund each year in payments in lieu of taxes. So it's kind of like we're passing it from the left hand to the right hand. It's to account for the use of that land that's not in circulation. So if you added that back, you could get another number that you could consider.
Okay. All right, I think, well, we have consensus to move it forward. Maybe if I have a couple more questions, Keith, I'll send them off to you from a finance point of view. Amanda, the concept you have is right. We agree with you. All of us agree that we could never do the full boat all in one shot. I think that hopefully we can get back on target, and therefore we'll have the opportunity to maybe make some more strides that way. But I think this is reasonable. Certainly, we've been subsidizing a lot of it to this point. So we need to do two things. We need to protect the city side, and we need to be sensitive to the community side. I think that's what we're going to be doing. So thank you very much for that. Thank you, Keith. We have consensus, so we can move that forward. Next up, we have a TIF discussion for the old mall property on Civic Avenue. Keith, you're going to lead this one, I assume.
Yes, tonight we're going to have a presentation on TIFs by Lindsay Rader and Emily Metzler. Lindsay is with Funk and Bolton, PA, and serves as the city's bond counsel. Emily Metzler is with Municap and often consults on TIFs. There's going to be a discussion of a TIF. There's been ongoing discussion of a TIF for the old Salisbury Mall property. So we thought it would be a good idea for council to get a presentation on what a TIF is. And here's some reasons why and why not a city would do a TIF. I would like to point out that due to the time constraints, they won't be touching upon each point presented in your packet. For that, I will turn it over to Lindsay and Emily.
Great. Who's going to go first?
Good evening.
Lindsay, you're sort of breaking up. Emily?
I'm here.
Can you
Good
help?
afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon. Is Lindsay going to go first
Yeah, she is intending on going first just to talk a little bit about some context from your perspective, and then she wants for me to talk a little bit about the TIF mechanics. So I would like for her to kind of set the tone before I go in, otherwise it will not really make a lot of sense. So hopefully we can get her to come back.
Yeah, she's attempting to come back now, I think.
Okay,
so
great.
We'll wait a second. Thank you for that.
Uh-huh.
I see her name up, so. I went off again.
Emily, perhaps, or Keith, she can call in if she's struggling and.
Shall we give her this one more attempt, and then I could put her on my cell, have her available to me, and then
Well, she should just be able to call
use the call-in number too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get better audio.
Julia, do you have that number handy? You could give it to me, and then I'll call her with it.
It was in that email I sent you.
Okay. All right, I'll get it.
It should just be right there.
Gotcha.
You have it, Keith. I can read it to you if you don't.
It's just competing for some bandwidth from me, so it would be good if you wouldn't mind just throwing it at me. It'll be quick.
Yeah, 301 715-8592. And then the code is 536-277-2908.
301-715-8592.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, I'm going to mute and I'll be right back.
While we wait for Lindsay and try to get her online, just out of curiosity, how much experience do you have with TIF now as we go into some of this discussion? I can do a little bit more detail, or if you have experience, we can, stay higher level.
Well, I have no experience, so
Okay.
and I've been on for a few years.
Okay. Very good. Anyone else?
Mir? April? How much have you had any experience with TIFs?
I'm aware of, and I've studied TIFs, and I think in certain situations they work great, and in some situations they don't. But I think it's something everybody should be open to, and it's one option for development. So.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good summation. I agree. I think that there's a prudent way to use TIF, especially from a local, jurisdiction perspective. And there are, not to do's with TIF. And those are the examples that usually give us the bad rap of, here's what not to do. But so I work with a company called Municap. We're actually located in Columbia, Maryland, but we work all over the country. So we currently work on types of financing like this in over 28 states across the country. And we work with many public sector clients who we represent, and we view our job as 90% education and how this tool can be used and when it's most beneficial, and answer questions and things like that. So that's part of what we're going to go over today, is just some of that high level. But I think you hit the nail right on the head as far as it can be a good tool when used correctly, and it can be a bad tool when not used correctly. And then just want to give some background on it as well, so everybody has a basic understanding. And Jack, I'll try to go through some of the details that will be really relevant to you.
Emily, you'll be able to share your screen too when you're ready.
Yep, absolutely. I have a PowerPoint that we prepared up and ready. I wasn't going to share it right away, but yeah.
I think Lindsay's coming on now.
I'm on, actually. Sorry about that. Technological difficulties.
No problem at all.
Lindsay, sorry.
Yes.
Do you want me to pull up the PowerPoint now? I've waited. I can pull it up on the front page, and if you just have a paper version, or if you can see my screen.
Yeah, I have the paper version in front of me, so.
Okay.
Did you start already with an overview, Emily, as I kept getting kicked off the
I will go ahead. I'll go ahead, Lindsay, and just kind of set the stage for our discussion.
Perfect.
It's all yours.
Okay. So the reason this evening we wanted to give you the overview of TIF is because it's been a while since the city did such a transaction, and there can be some common misconceptions about TIF. And before we entered into fee agreements for the developer entity to pay for the city's professionals' costs, we just wanted to come before the council and give you an overview and remind you of how TIF works. An important point is that while tax increment financing or TIF bonds are a special type of revenue bond, the proceeds are not actually loaned to the developer, and the developer is not personally responsible for payment of the debt service. Instead, for TIF, what we do is we capture a portion of the normal ad valorem real property taxes that property owners within the designated TIF district pay, and the portion of those property taxes that is essentially allocable to the increase in development is deposited into a special fund to pay debt service on the TIF bonds and to cover administrative costs. The portion of the normal real property ad valorem taxes that is imposed against the original assessable base value of property located within the TIF district flows directly to the city's general fund. Often, when a developer proposes a TIF financing, we also suggest that the issuer consider doing the financing as a hybrid TIF and special taxing district bond under the two different Maryland statutes that allow municipalities to issue TIF or special taxing district bonds. The reason for having the special tax backup is if the incremental tax revenues end up not being sufficient to pay debt service on the bonds, special taxes can be levied on the real properties within the district, which is typically the same district as established for the TIF bonds. And those are used to cover the debt service and make the bondholders whole when incremental tax revenues are insufficient. TIF projections, which is something that Emily's firm would prepare in order to help the city decide whether to move forward with the financing, are not actually a guarantee of results. They are based just on the information that is available at the time those projections are prepared, and they are based on information provided by the developer in terms of the expected build out of the project. But if the incremental TIF revenues are insufficient to cover debt service and administrative costs, the city is not actually on the hook to cover the deficiencies from other city funds. When looking at a potential TIF financing, a jurisdiction will want to take into consideration what those projections show, what the increased costs of services to the city will be, such as police, fire, road maintenance. And another point that an issuer always wants to take into consideration is whether it was planning to issue bonds for its own purposes in the calendar year in question, and if so, the size of those bonds, and whether the city was trying to issue bonds on a bank qualified basis for its own purposes. I'll turn it over to Emily now to kind of walk you through how the incremental tax revenues are actually calculated and diverted to the special fund.
Thanks. I left it on this slide here while Lindsay was talking about the incremental revenues. I'm a visual learner, so maybe this will help. I want to revisit what Lindsay was talking about on the incremental revenues. If you see on this graph here, the orange area at the bottom is the base. So in an example where a developer or the jurisdiction determines that it would like to create a TIF district, you would essentially freeze the taxes that the city is receiving today. And you would continue to receive that amount of taxes for the life of the TIF district. That represents your base, that orange at the bottom. So let's just say that you receive $100,000 in taxes now from that parcel or the parcels in the district. You would continue to receive those tax revenues for the life of the district. However, if the jurisdiction decides, if the city decides they want to create the TIF district, you're going to do it for a purpose. You want this development. It has good economic benefits, or there's infrastructure that you'd like to see financed, but you want to capture those revenues from the new development to help pay for that infrastructure, as Lindsay was describing. So in a TIF district, you can issue bonds to pay for certain infrastructure that allows new expanded development to occur. And with that new development comes an increase in taxes. And that's the blue area in taxes that you see over time. And what happens is those real property tax revenues that are created from the new development are captured, just the blue, not the yellow, orange at the bottom, and sent to a special fund to repay the bonds that were issued. Now, if the development didn't create the tax increment revenues as planned, or maybe assessed values dropped due to cyclical economic changes, or maybe the development is slightly slower, as Lindsay mentioned, there's oftentimes a TIF that's paired with a special taxing district. And that special taxing district essentially creates a floor, a minimum tax agreement, whereby if those new tax revenues are not created, they will still pay, the owner of the parcels would still pay up to that special tax so that the debt service is paid in full. The nice thing about that is you're still getting the infrastructure. That minimum tax kicks in, and there's no obligation of the jurisdiction. We are not asking for the city to back any TIFs. It is all, the development risk is put on the parcel owner, the private developer, and not the jurisdiction. And that is one really nice feature, as a city should not be taking that type of risk. Any particular questions about the mechanic side? I know, Jack, you said that this would be, your first time learning about a TIF. I'm sure you've heard of some TIFs in Maryland. In fact, we have a slide on here that just mentions a couple in Maryland. We have Arundel Mills, if you're familiar. That was a TIF. $30 million in bonds were issued. Prince George's County, we recently just issued the Hampton Park bonds. That was actually being issued to finance a county office building and roads and infrastructure off of 495. New development revenues will help to repay those bonds. In that case, they also used hotel occupancy revenues. Prince George's County has a statute that allows them to do that. National Harbor, if you're familiar, all of that development right off of 295 would not have occurred but for the new interchange ramp off of 295 in National Harbor, as well as all the parking that you see there and infrastructure. And so we've assisted with the issuance of $200 million in bonds for that project. In 2016, Howard County issued TIF bonds in the amount of $48 million, again, to finance certain infrastructure so that they could redevelop their downtown Columbia. That project was particularly important to Howard County because they wanted to centralize where their growth was happening and not have sprawl. And by focusing a TIF here and the infrastructure here, it's allowing for them to create a higher density. And they're also getting out of that social benefits, an elementary school, fire station, affordable housing, and they took advantage of the TIF process to get access to that. This slide here also lists just a bunch of TIF and special tax financings that we have across Maryland. They are expansive. Unicap alone has helped issue over $7 billion in TIF bonds across the country. And we're finding that cities' jurisdictions are using this as a finance tool because it's not pooling money from their general fund to create economic development and new revenues. It is relying on the development that's going forward to pay for itself.
And this is Lindsay. I don't know if it was mentioned previously, but with the TIF that has been proposed to the city, the type of improvements that the developer would be looking to have the city finance are roads and related improvements, stormwater ponds, pump stations, public parks, and street lights. So with a TIF and a special taxing district financing, what is typically funded are improvements that we all think of in the nature of infrastructure improvements that serve a public purpose or have a public use. Various jurisdictions under the TIF and the special taxing district have been granted additional authority to finance certain other types of improvements. In some cases, public parking garages are allowed or even private parking garages. But at least in this case, we're really looking at things like roads, stormwater, pump station, public park, street lights. And I think also to Emily's point that the property owners, which tends to be the developer in the initial stages of a financing and the period that the bonds are outstanding, really take the risk that the build out will occur as planned and that the value will increase in an amount sufficient to cover the debt service. The other party taking the risk, of course, is the bondholders, whomever ends up buying the bonds. And the bondholders understand that with TIF and special taxing district bonds, that the issuer is not backing those bonds with a pledge of its full faith and credit. So if incremental tax revenues are insufficient and if property owners don't pay their special taxes, it's the bondholders ultimately taking that risk. Also, when we look at, as we go through the process with a financing of this nature, and as Unicap models the projections, that helps to make an issuer make a determination as to how much of the size of the bond the issuer is willing to, in a sense, support, because of course the projections are not guarantees, but the hope is always that if the development proceeds as projected, after the first couple years, that enough incremental tax revenues will be generated in each year to cover not only debt service on the bonds and to pay the related administrative costs, but also to allow any excess incremental tax revenues to be released from the special fund in accordance with bond document release tests to flow back to the city. And once those excess incremental tax revenues flow back to the city, they can be used by the city for any legal purpose. They are not limited to being used to support the particular development in question or development in that area. The city can, once that money is released to the city, it can be used for any purpose the city decides it wants to use the money for.
I want to stop for a second. I know Lindsay and I are going into a lot of detail, and there are some points in this presentation that we have included extra information, but we weren't sure how much time we would have and what we could cover. I mentioned that I think it is good information, regarding pros and cons of TIF and considerations for them. But before we go any further, are there questions on how a TIF works and just the basic structure of what TIF is?
I'll go through the roll call. Mr. Bodie, you have any questions?
I do not.
Okay. Ms. Jackson? You're muted, April.
No.
Okay. Ms. Gregory?
No questions.
Ms. Blake?
No questions at this time. I'm taking a lot of notes. I'm certain as this unfolds, I will certainly have questions.
Understood.
Yeah, I have the general concept down now. I think what I'd like to hear, if we could have Keith maybe give us his perspective on where we should go, and where he wants to go.
Okay.
Keith?
Well, it will be important for them to give some of the reasons for, meaning why we would want to entertain a TIF and why not. But generally, I do want it to be clear that the city would be supporting the TIF by not collecting taxes that otherwise would have been collected. So in fairness, I think we should develop some criteria as a city for when we might accept a TIF and when we would not, just so that there's some consistency for when that we will entertain a TIF. And like, for example, one of the criteria might be but for. In other words, this might never happen if it was not for the TIF. In other words, because if it would happen anyway, why should we give our taxes to pay their debt service? That would be the question you would have to ask yourself, because essentially we're paying for the project out of what otherwise would have been taxes paid to the city. So we do need to be consistent, and so, but I think it would be good to go forward with some of the reasons why we would do it, and but the criteria I think should be consistent, and it should be consistent with our comprehensive plan, meaning there's some value there, something's happening that's going to benefit the city, and it's worth participating.
Okay. Angela, I think you had a question.
On the previous slide, I was looking at all the projects that had been utilized by the TIF, and it said on there Salisbury, the
North Fork.
like East Northern Collector. Is that Beagland Park Drive that connects Zion and over? Okay. How long ago was that? 10 years?
2007 was when the city did that TIF special taxing district financing.
Can anyone report on their experience with that? I see it listed, but I don't know what that means.
Keith, can you help us out?
That TIF originally failed, and then it was redeveloped to a new developer that took over. So during the recession, it didn't make it, and all of the safety nets that Unicap was describing that would make sure the city did not come out with any losses kicked in, and we did not lose any money as a result of that TIF failing. And eventually it became attractive for another developer to come in and make that happen. Now, Lindsay, you might want to add, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, with that one, we did some restructuring of that one. There was also in 2007 a TIF special taxing district done for the old mall property, excuse me. And at closing, there was a draw made for certain purposes. That, the economy tanked. That property never got developed as projected. And ultimately the bonds were paid off because that TIF was structured as a drawdown. And so only the initial draw was made, and eventually that was paid off, I want to say around 2011 or 2012, if I recall correctly. But again, the city never had to come out of pocket to pay debt service on that financing other than from the incremental tax revenues and special taxes that were levied with respect to that project. Keith had mentioned the but for, and but for is something we always look at in these transactions. And it's interesting because but for is not actually mandated by any of the Maryland statutes that relating to tax increment financing or special taxing district. In certain other states across the country, a but for component is mandated, but it is something that in Maryland, the practitioners routinely look at. What is the but for? And an important point is that but for can be different for different types of projects. So while taking a look at what is the but for, without this financing, why wouldn't the development actually occur? The reasons that the but for test might be satisfied can be different reasons based on what the development is and what you are financing through the issuance of the bonds.
Lindsay, can I add a point to that? Because
absolutely.
I think a common misconception is that but for this financing, the project won't go forward at all. But there's also this idea that but for this financing, the TIF, the project wouldn't go forward as contemplated. And that's a big distinction because I'll give you an example. We worked on the Mosaic TIF in Fairfax County. It was actually their first TIF that they did. And in that particular case, the developer, who was Eden's, they're a fairly large national developer, owned a site in a strategic location in Fairfax County. And they could have built a Walmart and some additional retail on that site and made an adequate return. They could have gone forward. But the county came to them and said that, they have this site, it's close to a metro station, and they really wanted something dynamic on the property. And the developer said, yeah, but what you're asking for, we would not get an adequate return. We can't build that and still get the same return if we put the Walmart in. And so in that case, the county partnered with the developer through a TIF. When I say partnered, I don't mean that they backed the TIF in any way. They still were not on the hook, but they asked the developer to produce this B plan instead of the A plan. And the county was getting a project that they wanted for the next 40 years, and it was going to create significantly more jobs, significantly more revenues to the county in the long run than the Walmart was going to run. They were getting that in return. And what they forfeited was, basically a $65 million TIF, where for a portion of that time, those incremental revenues, just the real property tax revenues, were diverted to pay for those bonds. That project is actually so successful that not even 10 years have passed. We issued them. We're just at the call date now. We're just at 10 years and we're refunding them. And every year since those bonds have been issued, they've created excess surplus. The project's been, gone really well. But the point I'm making is that the project could have gone forward. It just would have been something completely different that the county didn't want. And so sometimes when you're looking at the but-for test, it is, will it go forward at all? Or will it go forward on what we'd like as a jurisdiction for that project to be?
Keith, I have a question. Nobody has a crystal ball, but at the beginning of the meeting, for some other way, I said that I'm concerned about the budget for this year. Let's say that, would we even be talking about this if we were at the start of a recession?
I think the key response to that is there's no real impact financially to the city. The city's not taking any risk other than if this could have happened otherwise, and it would have been, as Emily pointed out, it would have been in our wheelhouse as to what we wanted. So we didn't need to influence what was being done. There's no risk that the city's no skin in the game, so to speak, that the city's putting in, other than the opportunity to collect taxes that it might have otherwise been able to collect.
Yeah, but if, let's say it's that blue, that blue angle in the drawing where it had the orange on the bottom. If they don't get anybody to buy the houses, correct?
Right.
Then the income is not coming there.
I understand your question, Jack. Let me see if I can answer it. So interestingly enough, when the 2007-2008 recession occurred, we learned a lot of lessons from that in the way that we were structuring bonds at the time. And we've since carried those lessons forward. And now here we are with a pandemic in our face and trying to think about how we structure bonds. And we're still implementing the same rules. And what those rules are, the investors that purchase these bonds understand that they're taking development risk. However, we're not actually closing on the bonds unless there is a capital stack in place. In other words, there's financing in place for the development that's supposed to go forward, or contracts in place. So a portion of the development, enough to at least generate revenues on a portion of the bonds, must be going forward. We cannot issue bonds with no development going forward. So if for example, on this project, in the city, if they're not ready, if they don't have contracts in place or financing in place, we will not issue the bonds. We will wait for development to be ready. Because the investors, while they're willing to take a risk, they're not willing to take that much risk because they learned from the recession 2007, 2008. It was too much risk to rely on just the value of the undeveloped property by itself.
Thank you. That helps. One other question. If we began the process now and said, yeah, let's go, how long would it take before for the thing to get through the system so that they can start construction?
Sure. Lindsay, did you want to ask something before I answer this question?
Yeah, it was just going to be very quickly that, yes, a lot of these proposed financings fell by the wayside when the recession hit, but there were financings that were still closed during the Great Recession and, went forward. And again, in each case, I think both the investors get involved in terms of, what criteria they want in places, as Emily pointed out, before they're willing to purchase the bonds. But there are projects and financings that successfully did occur during the Great Recession, though absolutely there were some that fell by the wayside.
To answer your question on the schedule, I pulled up another slide here that shows the general process for a TIF. And this, again, is just general, and every TIF is different and has different risk points. And those risk points are really important because for a deal to be successful, the whole key is to identify risk and mitigate them. And that process can vary a little bit. We oftentimes wait for the development. So we can go through this process that I'm going to describe to you, and we end up waiting on the development to go forward because they need land use approvals and entitlements, and then they get permitting, and then they have to line up their financing and capital stack before we can close on the bonds. Oftentimes it's a simultaneous close, and so we end up waiting on them. But in the meantime, we do have a lot of work that can be done, and it's generally viewed in three phases, which are outlined on this slide. So phase one is preparing a plan of finance. So let's just say that the city said, okay, we want to evaluate this TIF. Let's go. The first part would be this preparing a plan of finance. And what we do in that phase is we estimate the revenues that would be created from the proposed development, and we size bonds. So we basically say, okay, if this development plan goes forward, we could support X amount of bonds and it would be reasonable. And there are key sizing constraints. There are 4. I'm not going to get into them unless you want me to, but at the end of phase one, we would know that we had a plan that worked. We have a bond sizing that's reasonable for the development that's going forward, and we know that the revenues from that plan are sufficient to service that debt service and still leave enough revenues on the table for the city to be able to cover their cost of services, school, police, fire, and other, if they're pledging those revenues to the TIF. That is a very important metric, and that's all done in this phase one. So once we have that plan of finance pulled together, we would move into phase two, and I'll come back and tell you how long each of these generally takes after I get through a description. Phase two, we take that plan of finance and we get the governmental approvals. And what that means is we'll go and we'll meet with staff, make sure staff understands the key questions. Keith's going to have to evaluate all of this and make sure he's comfortable with all the math that we did. And after staff is comfortable then, and they've reviewed, then it would go to the council for their review and approval. There's the informal and the formal approvals. That's what is phase two. At the end of phase two, we have an ordinance authorizing an issuance of bonds. We have districts created, and we have a special fund created for those TIF revenues to be diverted to. After phase two, we move into phase three, and that's literally when we issue the bonds and raise the capital that goes to the developer to create the infrastructure or whatever it is that we're financing with bonds. Phase one usually takes 4 to 6 weeks, maybe a month, month and a half. Phase two, 2 to 3 months, and phase three can take anywhere from 3 months to 6 months.
Thank you.
And all of that timing is very dependent too on the developer producing, particularly for phase one, the information that MuniCap needs in the form it needs in order for it to be able to prepare the projections.
Gotcha. Keith, what's your recommendation? We can't hear you, Keith.
I didn't say anything yet.
Oh, okay.
No, I think it's the will of the administration that we would like to evaluate this opportunity. Again, we've done 2 TIFs. They didn't at first succeed because we hit the recession squarely, but we didn't suffer any consequences. So that's the best part of our experience to date. The key thing is that if we choose to move forward, there's a substantial amount of funds that are going to be invested by these developers. And so when we bring this back, and if for any reason at that time we don't like it, their money is going to be lost. So we need to keep that in mind as we go forward. And even though we're going to be evaluating it, money is going to be spent, and it's a significant amount by the developers. So that's why we wanted to introduce this, so that we could have a discussion that we're having.
Okay. There's no harm in doing the analysis. I don't think there's any harm in it. The only thing that you say that they're getting a TIF. So the investment they're making, if they fulfill all the requirements, they get a benefit from, obviously.
Well, I think what Keith was referring to, the way these transactions are done now, and it wasn't necessarily done this way pre-recession, but once a developer approaches an issuer, the issuer typically asks the developer for taking responsibility for paying the issuer's professionals. So if the council decides that they at least want to explore this, we would end up entering into agreements for MuniCap services, Funk and Bolton services as bond counsel, and perhaps even Mark Tillman's services as city attorney, in which the developer would agree to pay our fees on a monthly basis going forward. Now, the way I've written Funk and Bolton's fee agreement, it makes it very clear that the city is the client, even if the developer is paying our fees. And I know that MuniCap's agreement is written the same way, to make it very clear that the city is the client, even if the developer pays the fees. And what it also does, Funk and Bolton's draft agreement makes it very clear that while the developer is paying the fees, the city taking any steps, for example, if the city, looks at the projections and says, yes, let's go ahead and get the development district created, and we do that by a designation resolution, that does not obligate the city to actually issue the bonds. Basically, the city isn't actually obligated to issue the bonds, no matter how many steps we take throughout this process, until the city actually issues the bonds. And no funds are made available for the infrastructure improvements until the bonds are actually issued. So really what the developer is taking the risk at and putting funds out for is to pay for the city's professionals, because these can be time-consuming transactions. But the developer is asked to pay the city's professionals, taking the risk that the city may not ultimately issue the bonds for any number of reasons.
Gotcha. Thank you. That clarifies it. So today, I guess what we're saying is, and I'll poll the council in a second. I think what we're saying is you're looking for approval to go ahead with the initial discussion and assignments. Ms. Glanz, are you available to comment from the administration's point of view?
Well, this was a lesson for me as well tonight. But we're interested in in pursuing this and seeing certain projects move forward potentially. So we're excited about working with Lindsay and Emily moving forward if council is amenable to it as well.
And I believe this is Lindsay jumping in again. I believe in communications with Jennifer Miller, she had indicated last week that if the council indicates it's amenable to moving forward, one of the next steps would, once we get the agreements worked out with the developer, she would be coming back to the council and, apprising you of the terms of those agreements. They're in draft form now, but they haven't necessarily been shared with the developer.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Boda, should we proceed with this?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with, taking the next step and as we get into it, looking at the project, looking at how it's going to be implemented. I think all that plays into a part, making sure that we believe this is in the best interest of the city. So,
yeah. Thank you, Mr. Boda. Ms. Jackson, you're muted.
I'm comfortable with it with careful assessment.
Great, thank you. Ms. Blake?
I wouldn't say my comfort level is very high, and it's only because I really don't know much about this process. I wonder if we could get a copy of the slides for more study. I don't mind us moving things forward again, and I think with April making it clear that we would assess the process all along. My comfort level with this is just my lack of exposure and total understanding of this. And I would strongly prefer more time to read the slides, really sink it in and ask more questions, even if I can shoot them off to Keith, to just help me feel more secure in this. This is a big thing. This is for the property, the Civic Center property, correct?
Correct.
Right, and that's,
is that the same as the old mall property?
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
That's about well, I can see us moving it forward. I'm not blocking it in that way. I just feel like I need to be more comfortable in understanding TIF period. And I would like the slides, and I would like to be able to ask Keith questions as they arise for me after studying more information about this. And then as we go through the process, making sure that we're reassessing it to make sure that the city is, that we're getting what we need out of whatever this is going to provide.
Gotcha.
Angela, the slides are in the packet for tonight, so you can review them at your leisure.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Gregory?
This is far out of my wheelhouse, so I'm learning too, but I'm comfortable moving forward.
Okay, thank you. And I as well would like to move it forward. I think we're going to have the opportunity. This is all new to most of us, but I think that with a little bit of explanation, and as we get to the next phase, there are stopping points along the way that we'll be able to see how this thing is being translated.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely, there are definitely stopping points along the way.
We need to follow the process, let the process talk, and I'll be very happy when I start to see the dollar amounts and values coming across, and I'm sure at some point in time that's going to happen. So with that, we can move forward. Keith, you can move forward and get the ball rolling, and then we'll see where we go from there. I'd like to thank Emily and Lindsay for their presentations. I don't know if you ever had this many people who didn't understand what a TIF was, but I've learned a lot today, and I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot more and with a lot more discussion with Keith. So thank you very much for your presentations. It helped. And with that, we'll move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate everybody's
Thank you.
time.
Now have some final remarks from the council and the administration. Julia, anything that you'd like to finish up with?
Just to let folks know that we are working hard to finish up the census. I emailed you all today, council, about that, but we need to push. We've got till the end of September. I think it's 44 days, and we are farther behind than I would have liked to be at this point. And it's not against anything that the group has been doing, because the Complete Count Committee has been working their butts off out in the heat, getting knocking doors and working on events. So anything that council can do to, if you have an email listserv or anything like that, to blast your constituents. And we'll be doing some neighborhood walk type things over the next couple of weeks to do a final push that we'll let you know about to attend as well. But any support you can lend there is appreciated.
Thank you. Mr. Boda?
Yeah, if, like Julia said, the census is a key thing that everybody needs to make sure that they execute. And if you've got some graphs or some stuff that we can share in social media and stuff, that'd be great. Just ask everybody to continue to support your local businesses, local restaurants, and help them keep the doors open. And see everybody next week.
Ms. Jackson?
Just want to reiterate to keep safe, keep social distance, wear your mask, and just stay healthy.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Ms. Blake?
I'm going to say donate blood. If you're healthy, please donate blood. I could be one of the people who needs it. Please donate blood. If you're healthy, please donate.
Thank you. Mrs. Gregory?
I knew it was coming. Just want to reiterate what Ms. Jackson said about the masks. Please continue to wear them. I know it's a pain, but it can mean the difference between literal life and death for people out there. So please, please, please keep your masks on.
Thank you. As a final thought, I'd like to talk about the census for a minute. I think, we've all said it, you see it on the TV commercials and everything else. We need to get registered, because the funds that we get in a lot of areas are based on the number of people that we have. So we are in control of our own destiny. Each and every one of us has an obligation and a responsibility, and should have the desire to be heard. And this is one way, and probably the best way of doing that. So please, if you have not responded to the census, and we should do whatever we can as a council. And Mira's right, send us a lot of fancy, eye-catching things that we can put on our sites. And we should probably try to do that at least every other day until this situation closes. Because I think we're down to 43 days now, technically, because we lost a day today. But please do that, and also give blood. Thank you, everybody. And with that, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Good night.